Matthew 17, verse 27, Jesus says, however, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself. How many of you read Matthew 17 this week? A few. A very few. It's not that long of a section. You can do it. Read the Bible rather than watch the news. It's much more exciting. That's the reason it's called the good news. It is a lesser miracle that we give our attention to today. One that I say few, if many Christians can recollect on a ready basis. If I were to throw out a quiz right now and ask you to name a miracle of Jesus Christ, could you do it? Could you do it? Could you do it quickly? You would go what? Water into wine, walking on water, feeding the 5,000, raising the dead. All of these we know and we know well. They're big and they are impressive. But the coin in the mouth of a fish is an obscure miracle. Its very obscurity causes us to pause and ponder. Why? Perhaps the reason for its obscurity is that it seems like such a small miracle. Multitudes were not fed, demons were not cast out, the dead were not raised, hurricane-force winds were not commanded to cease and desist. But it is a miracle, nonetheless, and as such demands our attention. Christ Jesus and his disciples have just arrived in Capernaum, which, by the way, is the hometown to the Apostle Peter. What we read is that they come into town, they go into the house. Jesus and the 11 disciples go into what we assume is the home of the Apostle Peter himself. But Peter, meanwhile, is accosted outside. He is detained by those who collect the temple tax, and they ask him a question. Does your teacher pay the temple tax? Yes, he does, replies the Apostle Peter. Now keep in mind, this was not a Roman tax, but a Jewish tax, dating back to the time of Moses and the wilderness wanderings of the people of God, as recorded in Exodus chapter 30, which, by the way, I invited you to read last week. The monies gathered from this tax were used to support first the tabernacle and then the temple itself in Jerusalem. Every Jewish male 20 years old or older paid a half a shekel. When the tax collectors come to Peter with their inquiry, Peter appears concerned that Jesus would not be esteemed a good Jew if he did not pay the tax. His reply implies that Jesus had paid the tax in the past and would continue, thereby demonstrating that he was a devout Jew and observed Jewish laws. We gather from the text itself that Jesus was not present when this conversation took place, that he was already in the house, surrounded by the disciples, maybe with other people who were inside. Maybe they were conversing. Maybe he was teaching. We don't know. What we do know is that Peter had his conversation with the tax collectors in private, apart from Jesus Christ. And when Peter enters his own home, he is again confronted with a question, this time one asked directly by Jesus himself. From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes? Jesus asked. From their sons or from strangers? Jesus demonstrates to Peter that he, Jesus, is divine. That he is in fact the all-knowing Son of God. How else would he have known about the conversation with the tax collectors outside? Having demonstrated his divinity and that he is the Son and not merely a citizen of the kingdom, Jesus directs Peter to acknowledge the obvious, that the Son of the King pays no taxes. And therefore, Jesus is not bound to pay the temple tax. But rather than cause offense, Jesus directs Peter to take his fishing line and go to the shores of the Sea of Galilee to cast in line and hook, telling Peter that the very first fish he catches will have the required amount of money in its mouth. Once again, Christ proves his divinity in knowing that out of all the fish that are swimming around in the waters of the Sea of Galilee, there is one, only one, with a coin in its mouth. And that coin will be the exact amount of money needed to pay the tax for both Peter and Christ. No more, no less. By doing this, Jesus demonstrates to Peter that because of Christ, our relationship has changed. Our relationship with God and our relationship with one another. We are now not only sons and daughters of the King, but brothers and sisters of one another. And this humble miracle teaches us that greatness in the kingdom is derived from humility. Perhaps this is why this miracle is known by so few. With that, my friends, I say, Amen.